Meteorologist John Burchfield here. Hard to believe we're already over halfway through the month of May. And even though we do enjoy some beautiful weather this time of year, it comes at a price. And that comes in the form of those springtime allergies. You're not alone if you're experiencing whether it's the runny nose or the itchy eyes or all of the above. Some of those symptoms seem to be acting up and really reaching their peak this time of year. So in this week's edition of the Climate Friday newsletter, we're going to talk about those springtime allergies, what you can expect going forward for the rest of the month of May, and even looking ahead towards the summer months. Thanks for tuning in this week, whether it's on YouTube, WTOL 11+, or right here on our website. Good to have you with us. Every Friday, we publish a new Climate Friday newsletter for the very latest on climate change and how it may impact you. We'll get to that climate link with allergies in just a bit, but I do want to start off by breaking down the data on spring allergies and what you can anticipate as we go forward to the rest of the season. Now, many adults and many folks across the country experience regular allergies, and the statistics speak for themselves. Over 1 in 4, or about 26% of adults in the United States, suffer from seasonal allergies, and they seem to be acting up as we head towards the middle to latter half of the month of May. So what are the biggest culprits in terms of those allergens? This time of year, it is often the mulberry, oak, and ash, those three that are the biggest players in the allergy game right now, and it is tree pollen that has been through the roof. That is very typical of the month of May, that we see elevated levels of tree pollen, and that is the biggest culprit that may be causing those allergy symptoms. Ragweed is extremely low, and mold is something that's not exclusive to the springtime. It can really happen all year round. That is also on the lower end of the spectrum. Again, predominantly tree pollen that is causing those allergy symptoms. So what's the forecast hold for the weekend and beyond? If you're watching this video on Friday, perhaps a little bit of rain could briefly drop those allergy levels, but Saturday there is going to be another uptick with allergy levels reaching high. Into next week, there is a little reprieve, but still going to notice those symptoms as we remain medium to medium high for the duration of that forecast. So what are the biggest allergens this time of year? We are smack dab in that transition period between spring and summertime. As I mentioned, tree pollen is one of the biggest culprits and one of the biggest reasons you may be sneezing and sniffling. Grass pollen is more characteristic of the summertime, and that typically reaches its peak in the middle of June. Now, we find ourselves right in this intermediate time where the tree pollen is still ongoing and grass pollen is beginning to ramp up, and that makes May one of the worst months of the year for allergies. Now, if there is a light at the end of the tunnel, it's that by the month of July and August, we do start to see a slight decline due to the warmer temperatures, and then ragweed becomes the main allergen looking towards the latter half of summer and into the start of autumn. May, tree pollen, that is the biggest reason you're sniffling and you may feel stuffed up. Grass pollen starts to take over in the month of June. That is typical. And then due to the July heat, which by the way, July is our hottest month of the year, allergies briefly improve, but it is only a temporary reprieve because by August and September, those allergies can start acting up again. So before we talk about the impact of climate change, you may be wondering, well, how does the weather impact allergies and what role does Mother Nature play? Well, if we experience breezy weather, that can blow pollen around and cause elevated allergy levels. This time of year, we do often get breezy conditions that can aggravate those allergens. Additionally, if we get a stretch of dry, sunny weather, that causes pollen levels to rise and causes pollen in the air. Now, this is weather that is very characteristic also of May, and it's something we've experienced lately. Rainfall's been very sparse. So what does rain do to the pollen? It can temporarily clear the pollen, and it encourages growth, but it can also contribute to mold and other issues like that that may aggravate your senses. So how is pollen detected? I do want to quickly break down the science behind how pollen levels are measured. There's a number of electronic devices that use what's known as a volumetric approach. In other words, they measure the concentration or the volume of pollen in the air. The more there is, the worse the allergies. The less there is, the better the allergies. One of these devices is called a rotorod that is used to measure pollen, and that device has a sticky application on one side that captures and catches these pollen particles in the air, and these grease-coated rods collect pollen grains. Even though those might not be quite visible to the naked eye, when you look at them under a microscope up close, you can measure the concentration of pollen and see exactly how many are in the air and what concentration is the pollen. Of course, greater concentration means worse allergies. Lesser concentration means the allergies are generally a little bit tamer. Now, this time of year, tree pollen is the biggest culprit in the allergy game. We got an early start this spring, and climate change may be playing a role in that. Generally speaking, if we get milder winters and warmer starts to spring, we see an earlier uptick to the allergy season. And this week in particular, the levels of tree pollen, they have been through the roof. So that's one of the impacts of climate change. We do get an earlier start to the tree pollen season. Grass pollen is something that typically reaches its peak in the middle of June, and it's likely going to be worse than usual this year. That's something that we are just beginning to see as we head towards the latter half of the month of May. So let's talk about the impacts of climate change and some scientific studies that have been conducted in the past decades and even the past half century or so. Now, research has been done since 1970, and that is sort of a transition period when we really started to notice the big impacts of anthropogenic climate change getting worse. We are seeing a longer growing season, and across the country, that is a period that is 15 days longer. Due to the longer growing season, there's more opportunity for allergens to fester. And this study looked at 203 cities nationwide. So it's a pretty comprehensive analysis of a good chunk of the United States. On average, 15 days longer is how the growing season has changed. I'll talk Toledo in particular coming up in just a minute. Now, what about in more recent history? That first study looked since 1970. How about since 1990? This study concluded in 2018 and found 20 days is the amount that is increased. Additionally, we are seeing more pollen and a significantly so amount. 21% uptick in the concentration of pollen since 1990, and that goes to show that the concentration is greater and is increasing. Part of that has to do with a longer season, as we are seeing a longer elongated growing season and thus worse allergens. Now, among those cities that did see an uptick in the growing season, there were some, in fact, 31 of those cities saw a 1 month increase in the growing season. Isn't that a lot? That's 1/12 of the entire year, and that is one more month that you have to deal with the allergies. Not fun whatsoever. Now, interestingly, of all the cities studied, it was Reno, Nevada that had the biggest increase in allergy season. And get this, they saw about a 99-day increase. That is close to 3 months worth of an increase in allergy season, in part due to climate change. So what about the city of Toledo and Northwest Ohio in general? We've seen a substantial increase of about 45 days. That is above the nationwide average, and 45 days reflects about a month and a half. That linear trend is apparent. This data set starts in 1970 and ends just about in the present in the 2020s. And even though there is some year-to-year variation shown by the dips and the spikes and the downs and the ups, the overall trend line is very clear that we are seeing an uptick and a lengthening of the growing season that's causing allergies to last longer. So I want to quickly recap some of the biggest impacts climate change is having. The freeze-free season, or the growing season, that has expanded significantly, and that is one of the biggest impacts. Now, the average nationwide is about 15 days, but the city of Toledo in particular has seen a substantially greater impact due to climate change. Part of that could just be coincidence. Part of it might have to do with the geographical location of being in the Great Lakes and being in the Midwest. Allergy season is starting much earlier. We got off to a very early start with tree pollens this year, and additionally, seasonal allergies have overall grown worse, as that one study found a 21% increase in the concentration of pollen in the air. Now, across the Great Lakes, of course, Toledo stands out as well. The average city in the Great Lakes has seen a 9-day increase in the growing season. Looking out towards the west, 19 days. That is the region that has been impacted the most, and that includes locations like Colorado out through Nevada and California, and that might explain why Reno, Nevada, of all the cities studied, was the one that has the biggest impact and the biggest change in the pollen season. Now, we do still have several weeks, if not a couple months left, where the allergies are going to be a little icky and nasty outside, but whatever is in store, the WTOL 11 weather team will keep you updated, and each and every Friday we have a new Climate Friday newsletter. If you're not already subscribed, you're missing out. Head to WTOL.com/email, and we'll see you next week.